There is a region in your hand most people do not know they have. Not a muscle, not a tendon, a representation. A small territory on the surface of your brain mapped specifically to the fingertips and the muscles that control fine writing movements, that takes up more cortical real estate than the entire trunk of your body. The hand, in your brain, is enormous. The torso, by comparison, is tiny. And the part of your brain that handles the hand is in nearly constant conversation with the part that handles thought, memory, and meaning. When you write by hand for 10 minutes, that conversation gets louder, specifically louder in measurable ways, in regions that quiet down when you type the same words on a keyboard. The conversation has a name in neuroscience. It is called sensorimotor integration, and it is one of the oldest, most fundamental dialogues your nervous system carries on, and it is happening every time the pen moves. Most adults have spent decades shrinking that conversation. Phones replaced notebooks, keyboards replaced pens, voice memos replaced jotted lists. Each replacement was sold as efficiency, as freedom, as progress. And in one narrow sense, the marketing was right. The screen does free your hand. The problem is that the hand, once freed, stops sending the brain the signals that built much of what your brain remembers and knows. The signals are not optional decoration. The signals are part of how the brain works. You felt something settle reading that, a small recognition that the hand has been quieter than it used to be. That recognition is your first correct response, and what follows will explain what the hand was doing all those years and what it can resume doing in 10 minutes a day if you let it. Let me take you into the anatomy because the specifics make the rest of the explanation possible. The hand contains roughly 17,000 sensory receptors per square centimeter in the fingertips. Pressure sensors, vibration sensors, stretch sensors, temperature sensors. When you grip a pen and move it across paper, every one of these receptors is firing continuously, sending streams of information up the median and ulnar nerves into the spinal cord and onward to the somatosensory cortex of your brain. The brain receives this information at a rate that dwarfs what most modern activities provide. Typing engages a fraction of these receptors. Tapping a screen engages even fewer. Writing by hand engages the entire system, and it engages it in a pattern that no other common activity replicates. That is the input side. The output side is equally complex. To form a single letter, your brain must coordinate roughly 30 small muscles in the hand, wrist, and forearm in a precise sequence that varies for every character of the alphabet. The motor cortex calculates the curve of an O, the angle of a T, the loop of a G, and sends commands to the spinal cord that translate into specific muscle activations within milliseconds of each other. Each letter is a small motor symphony. Each word is a sequence of symphonies. Each page is hundreds of them. The remarkable part is what happens between input and output. Your brain is not just sending commands and receiving feedback in two separate streams. It is integrating them in real time, comparing the felt position of the pen with the intended position, adjusting pressure based on how the paper is responding, modulating speed based on the visual emergence of the letter on the page. This integration is sensorimotor integration in its purest form, and it requires a region of the brain called the parietal cortex to be active in a specific, sustained way that quiet thinking does not produce. This is the first finding that matters. The parietal cortex, when you handwrite, enters a state of activation that researchers can measure with EEG and fMRI, and this activation is associated with deeper memory encoding. Audrey Vandermeer at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology has been studying this for more than 2 decades. Her research group records brain activity during handwriting and typing in both children and adults, and the pattern is consistent. Handwriting produces theta wave patterns in regions associated with memory formation that typing does not produce or produces only weakly. I want to mark a careful boundary here because the brainwave story is sometimes told too confidently. The EEG findings are real and replicated. The interpretation that they represent superior memory encoding is supported but not yet definitive. What is established here, the two activities produce different neural signatures. What is well supported is that handwriting correlates with better recall in many tasks. What remains under investigation is exactly how the differences scale across age groups, content types, and time horizons. Hold the finding at its actual weight, which is high enough to take seriously, not so high as to claim certainty the data does not yet provide. Picture what is happening in the first 60 seconds of handwriting. Your prefrontal cortex selects a thought to commit to paper. Your motor cortex translates the thought into a sequence of letter formations. Your parietal cortex integrates the sensory feedback from the pen, the paper, the pressure of your fingers. Your visual cortex tracks the slow appearance of the words. Your hippocampus, the brain region most associated with memory consolidation, receives signals from all of these regions and begins laying down traces. None of this is conscious, all of it is measurable. And the entire choreography only happens because the hand is moving in the specific way that handwriting requires. Now consider what happens in the first 60 seconds of typing the same words. Your prefrontal cortex still selects the thought. Your motor cortex still issues commands. But the commands are nearly identical for every letter, distinguished only by which finger and which key. The parietal cortex receives much less sensory feedback because the typing motion is uniform. The visual cortex receives the words instantly rather than watching them emerge. The hippocampus receives a reduced bundle of signals because most of the supporting regions are operating at lower intensity. The information is captured. The encoding is shallower. This is the asymmetry. Two activities that produce the same words on a page result in different brain states, and the brain states determine how much of what was written ends up remembered. The friction of handwriting is not a cost to overcome. The friction is the encoding mechanism itself. There is a second layer worth understanding, because it operates at a developmental scale that is relevant for adults too. Karen James at Indiana University demonstrated something remarkable in studies of children learning to read. Children who practiced writing letters by hand showed activation in a brain region called the visual word form area when they later saw those letters. Children who practiced typing the same letters did not show the same activation, even when their accuracy at recognizing letters was equivalent. The motor act of forming the letter physically had built a richer neural representation of it that the typing practice did not produce. What this implies is that the brain learns letters, and by extension words and concepts, through the body that writes them, not just through the eye that sees them. The hand is teaching the brain. The brain is recording what the hand does, and when the hand stops doing what it used to do, the recording stops being made. This is not limited to children. Adults learning new material show similar patterns, though the effects are more modest because adult brains are less plastic than children's. Still, the principle holds. Handwriting recruits a more distributed network of brain regions during learning than typing does, and the distribution is what produces durable memory rather than fleeting capture. There is a third layer, and this one I find the most surprising, because it operates not at the level of memory, but at the level of attention itself. When you write by hand, you cannot multitask. The pen does not allow it. Your hand is occupied. Your eyes are tracking the page. Your attention is bound to the act in a way the keyboard does not require. When you type on a connected device, your attention drifts continuously. You are watching the screen, but the screen is showing you a window that lets you check email, glance at notifications, switch tabs, follow a stray thought into a quick search. The keyboard is not the problem. The screen the keyboard is attached to is the problem because the screen is a portal to everything else, and your attention slides through that portal without your noticing. Handwriting is monogamous, typing on a connected device is not. And memory, it turns out, depends heavily on undivided attention during encoding. The classic findings on attention and memory go back decades, well before the digital era. What changed in the digital era is not that attention became less important. What changed is that the tools we use to capture information became architecturally hostile to undivided attention. The pen does not push notifications, the notebook does not have a browser, the piece of paper sitting on the desk in front of you cannot interrupt itself. This is why the research findings on handwriting versus typing are likely conservative estimates of the real-world effect. In a controlled experiment, the laptop user is not allowed to check email mid-task. In real life, they are. The actual gap between handwritten note-taking and typed note-taking, in the conditions most adults actually use these tools, is probably larger than the experiment's capture. Consider what this means for the person over 55 who has noticed memory concerns over the past several years. Maybe names are harder to retrieve. Maybe a book read last month feels less vivid than it should. Maybe the details of a conversation slip away faster than they used to. The default explanation is aging. Sometimes that explanation is correct, but sometimes the explanation is not aging at all. Sometimes the explanation is that the daily practices that used to support memory have been replaced, gradually and almost invisibly, by practices that do not support it. If you wrote letters by hand 30 years ago and now you do not, your brain is receiving fewer of the integrated motor sensory signals that handwriting produces. If you took meeting notes by hand 20 years ago and now you type them, your brain is encoding less deeply. If you kept a paper journal a decade ago and switched to a digital one, the journaling practice continues, but a specific brain benefit of it has diminished. None of these shifts is dramatic alone. All of them together, accumulated over years, may explain a measurable fraction of the cognitive changes people attribute entirely to aging. I am not suggesting that screen use causes cognitive decline. The evidence does not support that strong claim, and I will not overclaim it. What the evidence does support is the more modest claim that cognitive engagement, sustained over decades, predicts better cognitive aging, and that handwriting is one of the more accessible forms of cognitive engagement available in daily life. Replacing handwriting with typing reduces the daily dose of that engagement. Over a decade, the dose reduction may matter more than people realize, particularly in combination with other reductions that modern life has quietly produced. There is an emotional layer worth naming briefly. Many older adults report that handwriting feels different in a way they cannot articulate, calmer, more focused, more like themselves. This is not nostalgia, or not only nostalgia. The vagus nerve, which regulates the parasympathetic nervous system, responds to fine motor activity and to sustained attention. Both of these are present during handwriting and largely absent during typing on a connected device. The calm that handwriting produces is partly autonomic. Your nervous system recognizes the activity as a state it has been built for, and it relaxes accordingly. Now consider what 10 minutes a day actually involves. Because the practical question is what can a person do, not what should the world look like. 10 minutes of handwriting is roughly 200 to 300 words at average speed. That is a journal entry, a handwritten letter, a page of notes about something you read, a list of reflections on the day. Any of these counts. The content matters less than the act. The brain regions that activate do so in response to the motor pattern, the sensory feedback, the visual emergence of the words, regardless of whether the words are profound or mundane. If you do this consistently for the next 30 days, certain changes are likely to appear. By the end of the first week, you may notice that the handwriting itself feels easier. The cramping or fatigue many people experience when they have not written by hand in years subsides as the small muscles regain their conditioning. The letters become more fluent, the pen feels less awkward. By day 14 to 21, something more interesting happens for many people. They report that the day they handwrote about feels more vivid in memory than days they did not. Not because the day was different, because the act of writing about it laid down deeper traces. People who handwrite their daily journal often describe being able to recall details from weeks ago that they would not have recalled from a typed entry, because the typed entry, while present in the file, was not encoded in the brain the way the handwritten one was. By day 30, some people notice subtle attention improvements. The capacity to read a book without interrupting yourself to check the phone may improve. The ability to sit through a conversation without your mind wandering may strengthen. These effects are not from the handwriting alone. They are from the daily practice of sustained, undivided attention that handwriting requires, training a capacity that the rest of modern life has been quietly atrophying. What I find most striking about the practice is how undemanding it is. 10 minutes, a pen, a notebook, no app, no subscription, no expert needed. The technology is older than civilization. The benefits, while not infinitely large, are real and accessible to anyone with hands that work. Here is what I would suggest if you are willing to test this with your own brain. Choose a notebook you actually like the feel of. The aesthetic matters because it sustains the habit. Pick a pen that flows easily, that does not require pressure, that produces a line you find satisfying. The friction tax of handwriting should not be physical strain, it should be cognitive engagement, which is different. Pick a time of day. Many people prefer evenings, because the calming effect of handwriting helps the transition into rest, and because writing about the day captures details before sleep consolidates them. Others prefer morning, when the mind is fresh and the day's intentions can be set deliberately. The time matters less than the consistency. Decide what you will write about. The simplest entry is what happened today and what I noticed. 3 or 4 sentences expanding each. That is enough. You are not writing for an audience. You are writing for the brain regions that need this input, and they do not require literary quality. They require the act. Resist the urge to type even a draft first and then copy it by hand. The encoding benefit is in the original act of writing, not in the copying. If the writing feels rough or unedited, that is fine. The roughness is the texture the brain is recording. Some people will discover, after a few weeks, that they begin to enjoy the practice in a way they did not anticipate. The 10 minutes becomes pleasant rather than dutiful. The notebook becomes something they reach for naturally. This is not motivation. This is the brain rewarding a behavior that activates its older, deeper circuitry. The reward is built in. It does not require willpower to sustain once the habit takes hold. For some, the practice extends beyond the journal. Letters return. Birthday cards become handwritten. Notes during phone calls migrate from the phone to a paper pad. Each of these is a small additional dose of the integrated brain activity that handwriting produces. The cumulative effect grows with the number of opportunities. Consider what your hand has been waiting to do. Across decades of typing, tapping, scrolling, the hand has been receiving fewer of the inputs it evolved for. The brain region that represents the hand has not shrunk, but its conversation with the rest of the cortex has become quieter than it used to be. 10 minutes of handwriting per day reopens that conversation. Not all the way, not to what it once was when handwriting filled a larger fraction of daily life, but meaningfully, measurably, enough to make a real contribution to how your brain ages. There is something worth noting at the end. The pen does not need to be expensive. The notebook does not need to be elegant. The handwriting does not need to be neat. None of the cosmetic features of the practice are what matters. What matters is the motor sensory integration that the activity produces. And that integration happens whether your handwriting is beautiful or terrible, whether the pen costs $2 or $200. The brain does not grade the output. The brain responds to the act. Find a pen tonight. Not in the abstract, not later, not when you have time. Tonight. There is one in a drawer, in a desk, in a bag you have not opened in months. Pick it up. Find any piece of paper. Write 3 or 4 sentences about the day. Take longer than feels necessary. Form each letter slowly. Notice the pressure in your fingertips, the small adjustments your hand makes, the strange and almost forgotten feeling of words appearing on a page because your body is putting them there. That feeling is the conversation restarting. The brain is listening. The hand has been waiting.